Karen, fire it up. All right. Okay, so it gives me, huge pleasure to welcome Tony Penna. Tony Penna is the General Manager of Liberty Utilities right now, but he's done a lot of things, including being a nuclear engineer, and he's going to talk to us about really what's happening with energy. There's so much change happening. He's called his lecture Energy Evolution. And Tony, thank you very much for coming and,
No, it's a pleasure.
Presenting to us.
It's a pleasure. And can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, very good. Okay, so the plan is to rush through this deck of slides as quickly as possible so that we can engage in conversation. I'm hoping there'll be lots of questions and most of them thought-provoking. But the reason Neville picked me is I was in the energy industry for a while, for some 25 years. Started out at Newport News Shipbuilding as a startup engineer for nuclear reactors for aircraft carriers. And then I went to Calvary Cliffs Nuclear Power Plant in Southern Maryland and was a project manager there, managing projects. Nuke plant, lots of technology. As it gets older and the technology needs to be replaced, some of it just doesn't exist anymore. So it's an intricate process of merging the new technology with the old. Then I came back to California, to George Air Force Base, or what's now SCLA, to work at a 3-on-1 combined cycle natural gas plant. First one that was built in California in a decade. And I came to be the plant engineer there. And I left there to work with an energy developer to permit 2 power plants, and they are hybrid solar thermal plants. So you have both the gas turbine and the steam turbine as the combined cycle, but you also have 50 megawatts of solar thermal getting integrated to the same steam turbine. And we permitted one of those for the city of Palmdale and for the city of Victorville. Unfortunately, we permitted them just as the market crashed, and they have not been built. But the permits are still active, so they, in fact, could do that if they choose to. Okay.
Change it?
Change it.
Then you can
Lynn gave it to me. What did I do with it?
Oh, right behind you, Tony.
All right, very good. Sorry about that, guys. Can they see the slide? And we're trying to get the slides in front of you. All right. Let's go back one. So this is what we'll discuss today. We'll briefly touch on each of these topics, and like I said, I think we'll have time for a lot of questions afterwards. So talk about what influences the energy, the RTOs and the ISOs, and I think you know about those, but we'll add a little different perspective perhaps. Different types of generation available to us in 2016 and some of the issues with each. Show you a graph that shows how we've evolved in the last decade. Can't talk about generation without transmission. And then Neville asked me to get cute and creative with some predictions for the future. So we'll do that. And so there we go. So I guess if you look at the major regulators, what you can see is that energy has a political component. Both the Public Utility Commission and the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, ERS, are appointees. They're not voted on by a Senate confirmation or anything. So it is very political in nature. The EPA, obviously, I think everyone understands their role. And regional transmission organizations and independent system operators, and then IPPs. And IPPs are not only small plant, well, they can be large. Actually, the High Desert Power Plant is an IPP, and it's 760 megawatts. But it also includes things like cogen. So,
long story short, there's a lot of players.
There are. You know, that's well said. So PUCs, they look out for the consumer. The Public Utility Commission's goal is to look out for the consumer. They make sure that the systems are kept in good state of repair and operation, and they also set the rates. And that's a lot of people tend to think that the rates, the energy company just asks for what they want and they get it. Nothing could be further from the truth. It's a very complicated formula, but at the end of the day, it comes out fair, particularly to the customer. And I'll answer questions about that later if you're late. The EPA, they just can't win. Those folks are between a rock and a hard place. Half the country thinks they're overbearing, the other half thinks they're not doing enough. I suspect the answer is somewhere in between. So let's talk about the regional transmission organizations and the independent system operators. They don't own the transmission lines, but they're responsible for making sure that they're available. They make sure that people have access to those, and not political access, but they honestly have, fair access to those high lines. They centrally dispatch load. As you've probably already learned, we don't have the ability yet to store electricities on large quantities. So generation is essentially equal to demand. And the ISO sees the demand, and they will dispatch additional plants as necessary to make sure they can meet it. They'll also tell power plants to back down if they have too much. They also do the regional planning, for new transmission, for looking at a grid, if you will. And then FERC, their role is, I guess they get involved when it's interstate. So ISOs, we have one in California, the Cal ISO, and they do those very things for us. There are lots of them throughout the country. Back east, there's the Pennsylvania, PJM, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Maryland. Texas has its own. Texas is so big, they actually don't need, or currently don't choose, to interconnect with, have a lot of interconnects outside of there. So they have, I think it's called the ERCOT is theirs, and then there's one up in Services New England as well. So I think I said that. The challenge with energy being generated real time is power plants need to be built in advance of the load. And since it's a several-year permitting process and a several-year construction progress, electric utilities have to be very forward-thinking. Well, here comes the opposition and the state saying, well, we don't want you to put $700 million or $700,000 into the rate base for a new power plant that we're not going to be able to use for 6 years. So it's a very adversarial relationship at many times between the utility and the Public Utility Commission, because the utility can't afford to build that power plant unless they can get those expenses put into their rates, and PUCs are reluctant to give you rates for something that's not actually generating power or needed at the time. I think you'll see a lot of changes as battery technology increases. Tesla is all about battery technology. There's a lot of hype around that car, and surely they are exciting and they look good. Pay attention to the battery technology. That's driving, that and PV are driving a huge change in the American electric market. So, can they see this?
Yes, they do.
All right. So this is a load demand curve. And essentially, this is time across the bottom and megawatts across the top, or on the y-axis. And what it says is there's very little load at, 6 a.m., but then people start waking up, and as they wake up, toasters come on, hair dryers come on, you get to work, things, then everybody gets a cup of coffee, settles down for a while, really peaks again. This is the normal day load. Then you have another peak in the evening as people get home, they do dinner, they bathe the kids, you turn on the television, finally you get done watching Jimmy Kimmel and things start going down. Well, this is important to us because we need to have loads at different times. And we try to do that by cost. And currently in the US, coal is still one of the most inexpensive forms of generation. So we have a base plant that's running all the time because you need coal. We also have nukes. We still have about 100 of them in the country, and those are base loads. We don't cycle the nukes. But now we start getting into natural gas. And natural gas has the ability to be either or. You can base load it.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Neville,
Yeah, man.
can you, okay, the bottom picture, can you rotate the bottom picture to the top? Whenever an instructor does this,
Yeah.
we don't see that bottom picture.
Yeah, I'm gonna try that. We do have something to do that. I've been wanting to try this anyway, so thanks.
Thank you.
No problem. Sorry. It is.
What he has is. Sorry about that.
No, not at all.
Does that make any difference, Matt?
No, you actually, the idea is that lower, I guess, right-hand image, if
Right.
you're looking at your screen, rotating that to the top. I think that can only be done on your end.
Yeah, I'm trying. I'm hitting different presets. Do I need to enter that? Is anything changing at all?
No,
Nothing changing? Nothing changing right now?
nope.
All right, I'm sorry, but I'm gonna have to, we've got to have that meeting with
Okay.
Brian, and we'll have that next week and try to sort that out. Apologize. We'll just have to keep going. Sorry, I thought there are a couple of different looks, but apparently they're not kicking in. Sorry,
Let me try it a different way, guys. If you think of an XY axis, and you're looking along the X plane, go up a couple units and draw a horizontal line parallel to the X axis, and that block is coal. That's base load power. You have to have that any time of day. And then go up a little further and you have nukes. So the idea is coal and nukes form our base load, and natural gas helps to form some of that too. But natural gas is unique in that they're fast responding. Those machines can fire up rather quickly. So you can use natural gas either A as a base load, you can back it up or down a little bit, or you can use it almost as a peaker if you want it. And then as you start getting into the real peaker plants, that's when you start getting into the ones that aren't very, not only aren't they economical, they're also not very environmentally friendly. That's when you start burning things like diesel fuel and oil. And we try to do that just at a bare minimum, obviously. So
coal, understand this, Tony, coal and nukes run
24/7.
To keep the electrons out there.
Correct. Most nuke plant, the one I worked at had the core design, so it was a 2-year cycle. And we had 2 units, so we would have an outage each year for one of the plants. And the nuke is unique in that the fuel in the center of the core isn't all the way burned up. So we would have to take out the stuff that was most expended and shuffle around fuel elements that we knew still had some energy in them. We'd put them on the periphery. So sometimes you do a full reload, but most times you're doing a reload of partial core, and you're, depending on the core geometry, you're just moving some of the elements around. And yeah, they'll run for 24 months. And they'll actually, if they have a small maintenance issue and they can defer it, they'll defer it so that you can keep the power on the grid. And the way the nuke industry worked when I was in it, if for some reason that plant was called offline, either it was an unexpected trip or there was a storm coming or whatever, once you brought it down, you went ahead and did all that maintenance before you brought the unit back up. So in case you were wondering, how do you avoid doing maintenance for 2 full years? There's a lot of maintenance that we learned to do while the plant was operating. So let's look at coal. Coal was actually very important to the country. It powered the Industrial Revolution. It has a place in our history, but it's clearly being phased out. And I think roughly 70 of the coal plants that have been shut down have either been repowered with natural gas, i.e. they're using the same facility, they're just bringing in a different fuel, or they soon will be. So the infrastructure that was put in place, because mind you got transmission lines coming there, you got a steam turbine there, you can use a lot of that infrastructure. It's just a different fuel that we need. Natural gas. Natural gas is a very cool fossil fuel. It burns very, very clean. Our combined cycle power plants can get nearly 70% in efficiency, which is absolutely huge. Simple cycle is somewhere around 33. So I think you guys have studied combined cycle, but the short version, as a refresher, is you have 3 gas turbines, or what are essentially jet engines, only about 14 times larger. And you take that jet engine and you connect that to a generator, but you take the exhaust heat from that and you put it in a boiler and you boil water and you make steam and you run a steam turbine. So you get and the steam turbine obviously is connected to a generator. So you get all that additional power with no more fuel. You can use the waste heat. So it's a great way to do it. And as I say, we can use them for either baseload or peaking. The one at the George Air Force Base in High Desert, we were on a daily dispatch schedule for months on end during the summer or the winter. We would run nonstop. The shoulder months, the spring and the fall, where the power demands would fluctuate a little bit, we would be dispatched daily. But during the peak demand, we would run full out. Nukes. I got to tell you, I missed a boat on that. About 20 years ago, I thought the nuke industry was on its way out. They were starting to decommission more plants than they were building, and that just sort of, to me, signaled the end of it. And we're down to about 100 reactors from reactor plants from, I think, a peak of 110. And there's another 15 or 20 that are borderline. Do companies keep the risk? Do they, are the economics there? Do they? So there's another 15 or so that may get shut down. However, they're not dead. There's actually 2 under construction right now, and they are, there's a lot of benefit to them environmentally. And I'm guessing you've heard that the big issue with regard to nuclear power is, what do you do with the spent fuel waste? And that's a tough one. And I'm hoping there's lots of conversations about that when we get done these slides. Hydro. You just can't say too much about hydro. It's very clean. It's ongoing. There are currently 20 projects that I could find in 5 different states to retrofit their dams to add hydro. I'm at a loss to think why you would have built a dam and not put a generator on it the first time, but apparently there were reasons, and we didn't, but we're going back to correct that now. And building new dams is challenging because what we've learned is it affects the habitat of the life. Some of the mating patterns, particularly like salmon and other fish that are very unique in their life cycle, and so it alters their migration paths. And we're more sensitive to that now. So I don't think we'll be building a whole lot of dams, but retrofitting the ones we have with generation makes good sense to me. Renewables. All right, this is the one. This is in vogue this year. This is what everybody has been liking since probably 2005 or 6. And it is, they certainly add a diversity to the portfolio. We can't, if you go back to that base load versus peaking load, they're kind of a hybrid, right? I mean, you can't count on them all the time because the sun doesn't shine 24 hours a day and the wind doesn't blow 24 hours a day. So they're kind of at the top layer of reliability, if you will. But they are great for supplementing coal and nuke and gas. And particularly on the photovoltaic side, the prices are coming down on those so much that it's just, it's hard to beat the economics on those. But they have issues, right? You have a big, large solar field, and like the one out at State Line, and it routinely kills birds, right? I mean, it's got that focused energy, and they fly in there, and if they're they essentially get vaporized. On the ground, you've got all that disturbed land, and sometimes desert tortoises get in and they can't get out. So we worry about those things. Windmills are still killing birds, and they make a noise. Some people, if you're near one, you can hear that constant, whoosh if you want, and so they're not without more issues to address. Something that's been in the paper recently has been our forests. We have 102 million dead trees. And in California, we choose not to harvest them. And the fire folks are very concerned that if the drought continues much longer, 102 million trees going up in flames is going to, just devastate our forest. So once upon a time, we would have a biomass plant. We would run up and we'd get those trees and we'd bring them down and we'd burn them and put them in a kiln or something like that. And we would make energy out of them, and that would preserve the forest and be a renewable fuel source as well. We're not currently doing that. Keep your eye on that. Something may happen as a result of the continuing drought. So, a couple pictures that I thought you might like. 2005, we had half of the generation in the U.S. was by coal, and nuclear was about 19%, natural gas was 19%, and hydro is about 6%. And look at renewables at 2%. Now, coal's down to about 34% in 2015. In 2016, you see where I wrote there, it looks like it's going to be closer to 30% at the end of this year. Natural gas at 34%. Nuclear hadn't changed much. Hydro hasn't changed, but renewables have gone up 3 times. And I think we're going to see even more of those. I personally don't think we're going to see a lot more of the large solar thermal plants. I think we're going to see more of the distributive energy photovoltaic. You'll start seeing neighborhood PV fields and things of that nature. They're easy to install. You can keep them low voltage and jump right in on the distributive energy side, and they're so much less expensive. All right, so in summary, a diverse portfolio adds reliability and stability to the grid, right? So if a coal plant trips off, you can fire up a gas plant. If you get a lot of cloud cover in your nukes and your solar drops off, you can fire up a gas plant or increase the load on a gas plant. So there's a lot of options there. The regulators, they do pay a place in it. Keep an eye on the new administration is saying they are going to take a look at the EPA to see if in fact they are overbearing. I suspect there'll be an equal amount of pressure for them to be diligent in protecting the air and the water. But I think it's the greenhouse gas issues that's really driving of all the potential pollutants. The greenhouse gas is still the one that's I think driving the renewables. So, transmission lines. There's a big need for these. That's sort of been not gotten a lot of the focus the generation has gotten. The transmission lines essentially tie grids together and essentially can form a national grid. And that way, if in California we want more renewable energy, we can buy the wind from the Midwest. We can get it here. When they're designed, they're built, they're typically transmit in a very high voltage AC to minimize the line losses and to improve reliability. But there are environmental concerns as well. A lot of people, you can hear the humming off them, so they don't like to have them near neighborhoods. There's the sight, the visual. A lot of people think they're obnoxious to the landscape. And then there are, seems to have been a lot of studies saying that the electromagnetic waves that come off of that will affect people. Unfortunately, all the studies that I read by people who say it does that are only people who say it does that. And every study done by the energy industry said it doesn't. So your guess is as good as mine as whether or not that actually affects us or not. And then we have something called a NIMBY, and that is short for not in my backyard. And these are people who just don't want it built near them. They acknowledge the need for electricity and for it to be generated and transmitted, but they just don't want it here. They want it somewhere else. And that causes problems. The further you move, for example, the big solar plants are way out in the Mojave Desert, here where we live. Well, that's not where the big population demand is. That's down in the LA basin. So you have to transmit that power. You need transmission lines to do that, and you suffer losses. That's why I think PV will take a bigger part. We still want the renewables, but I think if we have a smaller renewable for a community, that'll be in more favor than the large plants. Transmission line in the future, smart grid. I'm thinking you guys have talked about smart grid. It's a term that gets thrown around a lot. It pretty just means a modern grid with increased technological advances. It'll have a communication piece component to it. And I think SCADA is essentially going to be the platform that it uses to launch it. If you haven't discussed SCADA yet, it's essentially the ability to control and monitor remotely. So we can open breakers, close breakers, switches, browse. Yep.
All right.
And what do we have? So in the future, and this will be your future now, so I would think that the best portfolio will be a variety of options of all those. I think in the future, if scientists continue their quest, nuclear may be fusion instead of fission. And that will eliminate a lot of the concerns that we have now with how to handle the waste. I think renewables could be tidal instead of solar as the predominant one, or instead of wind. We have a lot of coastline, and we could take advantage of that. And self-generation, I suspect will, solar is still very affordable for homeowners. There have been a lot of incentives for it. And as battery technology improves, I think you'll see more self-generation with a little bit of self-storage. That will, in my mind, forever change that'll change the electric utilities, because then they'll lose customers. And if you look at the technology with the smart grid and the battery research, I think there's a tidal wave of technology that's coming. And I don't know if I'll see all of it, but certainly you folks will. And let me put it into perspective. From 1973 to 2012, right? So in 1973, we got the first cell phone. First cell phone, 1973. By 2012, only 39 years later, there were 4 billion cell phones being used. In 1903, the Wright brothers flew the first airplane. In 1969, we landed on the moon. So if our focus is, battery storage and smart grid technology, we have a history of doing great things when we put our mind to it. I suspect in your lifetime, you'll see changes that you'll be able to tell your kids about, and they'll have a hard time understanding how you used to live in such a primitive environment as the one we have today. So, in conclusion, I will tell you the power industry is changing. I think as you see new, I think the solar prices are going to get so low that it will change the electric utility industry, because they'll lose customers. I think if as batteries get done, if they come up with a $35,000 car that'll go 200 to 300 miles on it, I think you'll see our economy go from being petroleum-based to electrical-based. So if you can get a $35,000 car and charge it at your house and never have to go to a gas station again, we'll be creating more electricity and we'll be using a lot less oil and gas, in my opinion. And I would say, I put that last bullet on here that says things are changing and there's going to be challenges and you guys are going to be, you're going to be working at it. In my opinion, the opportunities that you'll have comes for the non-traditional thinker. Don't focus too much on what we did, focus on what you can do. And I think you'll get out of technology what you need. Okay, so we've got about 8 to 10 minutes for questions. Are there any, I hope?
Let's open it up to the brilliant non-traditional thinkers at AAE. You guys, what questions do you have?
I think they're all frozen in the room here. Come on, you guys.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
I have to go. Over here. Alright. Hello?
Yep.
Justin here. I have a question about nuclear waste. Where does it go?
Okay, no, that's a good question. I can't tell you where it goes without telling you where we thought it was going to go. The federal government built takes money from all the nuclear plants from the time they went commercial and put it in a bank account so we could have one federal repository for all nuclear waste, and that was going to be at the bottom of a mountain called Yucca Mountain outside of Las Vegas. We've spent probably $4 billion on that to find out that Nevada doesn't want it. So that's what we were going to do. What we actually do is when the fuel is done, it sits in a swimming pool for about 10 years till it cools off. And once it's cool, we put it in a cask, pretty much like think of a long cylinder, steel cylinder, and we put it in there and we weld it on both ends, and we put it in a little, what looks like a mausoleum, on site at the nuclear power plant, and it's just air cooled because it has cooled off. So when the fuel comes out, again, it needs to sit in the swimming pool for about 10 years until it cools down, and then we put it in this cask, we seal weld it, and we store it on site. The federal government is still promising that there'll be a federal repository for all the waste at some time, but to my knowledge right now, we don't know where that'll be or when it'll happen.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Are there any other questions? And I can hear you from your seats.
Oh, you can?
Well, I have a question. I guess Elon Musk is putting a lot of effort into home-based energy storage, either for PV on the roof or possibly both for PV on the roof mainly. But I was curious whether or not those batteries could also be charged using grid electricity during low peak hours to make better use.
I would think they could. The technology is there to charge them, and I suspect the utility would very much like to keep that connection to the home in hopes of doing that, so they could keep a customer.
So Tony, can I add on to Matt's question? You mentioned what I understand is called distributed generation.
Correct.
So the need is in LA, for example, let's generate it down there on top of their warehouses and their rooftops. What we hear from some of the big utility companies, Southern California Edison, for example, is all those little generation sources upset the grid. It's incredibly hard to monitor. Is that real, or is that just a smokescreen, or is the technology truly not there to where Mr. Huffine you know, has all kinds of gadgets and gadgets, and he puts up a system and he generates what he needs and extra. Can we manage these distributed generation?
And the reason and the reason you challenge Edison's answer is because up until about 2008, Edison fought the renewables. They didn't want them because they're unreliable. They didn't like them. And then along came Governor Schwarzenegger and said, too bad. We're doing that. That's the new law of the land. And by the way, Edison, they can't be paper contracts. You can't just say, I've got a contract to get it in the future. We want megawatts delivered to the grid. We want them renewable. So Edison is fully on board with that. So I don't challenge their integrity of the answer. And yes, they do have some challenges. If all the generation was coming from base load or a utility generator, you got very tight, strict controls over everything they do. But homeowners, not so much, because now you've got it coming from a variety of sources. Cloud cover now pays a big deal, and it is a little more challenging. And that said, there's a lot of smart people there. They're going to figure that out because I think they see it as much as everyone else. That's not going away. That'll probably be expanded. Other questions, guys?
Could you walk us through kind of piece by piece of what are the elements of the old grid and what are the additions to the old grid that make it smart?
Well, the old grid wasn't smart at all. We have generators that are connected to high lines, and we have relays that would trip the power plant off if it was generating too much or too little. And without getting into a discussion of electrical theory, let's just say it wasn't real smart. The smart component, as I understand it for the household, will be it'll be a meter in which it's not much different than what you have now in that it can communicate with you. Currently, Edison and other utilities have devices in your house where they can turn your power off if they need to, so that they don't have to start up another power plant, or if they're reaching maximum. So they'll have that component. But the smarter it gets, sir, is you'll be able to, I suspect, program your habits. It will look at your habits. It'll know routinely when it can turn off your hot water heater because it knows you're not using it. And there's no reason in their mind to have you heating hot water at between midnight and 5 a.m. if you're not going to use it until 6. And that's where they'll get more into what are the household habits. And you'll probably be incentivized. If you say, yes, please always turn off my hot water heater when I'm not using it, you'll get a discount for that and other things as well. That's the biggest load that I can think of, but it will be, in my opinion, very communicative with the end user, with the customer. They're going to have to get very customer oriented so that folks don't continue to leave the grid, and that meter will be the conduit for that.
Thanks.
Welcome.
Anyone else? Brandon? So, funny, nuclear power, huge public relations issue. How does nuclear power industry and us, if we decide it is a viable alternative or part of the picture, how do we go about calming the public?
Yeah, that's gonna fall on the gentleman in the back of that classroom and you to educate people that it is a well understood science and process, and that we don't need to fear. Are the consequences of an accident catastrophic? Absolutely. But if you look at the safety record in nuclear power plants, it far exceeds most other industries. These are a group of people who are dedicated to making sure that an accident doesn't happen. And the testimony to that is of the 1,100 people who worked at the Calvert Cliffs nuclear power plant where I worked, we all lived within 5 miles of that plant. And if I were afraid, I would have obviously moved my wife and son further from it. So we have a lot of confidence, and it's going to rely on education's going to solve it, Neville. That's the only thing that's going to do it. I don't think it's just a PR campaign to promote it. I think it's got to be, let's get smart enough to understand the science, understand the risk, and then look at what we're doing to mitigate them.
Got a question about that. Not to be devil's advocate, but you can't really compare a risk related to fossil to a risk related to nuclear because the scale is so different. You can't compare, you know, an oil pipeline spill to Fukushima. It's incomparable in terms of the scale of the time that it can actually affect people and systems. So you know, if you look at just the numbers, that's one thing, but the scale of impact, it's generation. I mean, it goes for generations versus partial generations. Is that fair to say?
Oh, I think you're dead on. The consequences of a nuclear accident are not insignificant. In fact, they're the exact opposite. That said, there aren't very many of them. And in the U.S., we've had, you know, 3 Mile Island, and what the nuke industry did was take a lot of lessons that were learned from 3 Mile Island, and we haven't had an accident since then, since we implicated all the post-TMI mods. And so I don't fear the technology, and I think if others understood it better, they would acknowledge the risk, but they would see the probability of that risk as very low.
So is it fair to say that Fukushima, and I know I'm kind of quoting you on this, but a few others, was very preventable after it happened, and that it was more a management issue, not a nuclear technology issue? The way they managed that disaster was the problem.
I read the report from Wayno, and that was their conclusion, and I agreed with it.
Yeah. That they could have mitigated those consequences as it was happening, but they did.
Agreed. And by the way, that's the same conclusion I'll draw of the 3 Mile Island accident as well. That was fully preventable. Had those operators sat on their hands, the engineered safeguards would have shut that plant down and cooled it down. The actions they took were contrary to their training and contrary to, were just contrary to what needed to be done.
Yeah, okay. All right. Anyone else?
Are we good?
I think we're good. I mean, just so you guys know, nuclear is a big question for us here in California because we just had
San
Onofre shut down, and I believe what was that 20% of our base
for SoCal.
For SoCal, and then Diablo up near San Francisco, which is a smaller plant, is slated to close. So these are questions we're dealing with right now. And you know, the question is, do we have good alternatives if we're going to shut these down? So these are ongoing issues as we speak.
Tony, I have a question. You said there are some that are being built.
Yes.
Is that U.S. or?
Yeah, in the U.S. There's in Georgia and South Carolina, I believe. And probably part of the existing utility. So the plant Vogel fleet will grow by one, and I forget where in South Carolina it is, but that'll probably be on the same site. The economics and risk matrix for utilities is it's better to have multiple nukes than one nuke. You just get economies of scale.
You kind of group them together. Any other questions? Tony, I want to thank you very, very much.
No, it was a pleasure. I hope you guys got something out of it, and have a good day.
Can you guys hear me okay at AAU? Yeah, Tony, do you need, if you want to make that call. Can you guys hear me at AAU okay? Did anybody bring back those field trip forms today?
Yes, we have a couple. Justin didn't know.
What? What?
Justin, how can you,
Abigail,
can I talk to Justin?
I'm just.
Justin, how can you expect to get an A if you don't take care of the teacher? This is a basic concept, okay? So,
Why are you bullying me?
I'm bullying you.
he's at.
Bullying, yeah, you're the kind of guy. So, who can bring him tomorrow, please?
We won't be here tomorrow.
Oh, you won't be there?
I've asked them to bring them first thing on Monday.
Okay, right, and I'll pick up, Mr. Huffan, could we leave those for me somewhere today, those other two? I'll pick them up.
You'll pick them up?
Yeah,
Can I have them now? Is this done? How can I get them to you? I only have one.
okay. Well, let's just leave it till Monday then. But everybody, please, Monday, okay?
Yeah.
Please, please, please. All right,
We
thank
have to get
you.
a parent.
That one's not quite
Okay.
ready anyway. Okay.